Welcome everybody to our Cyber Short series with Sophos, a LinkedIn Live series with the goal to bring you insights on trending cybersecurity topics, the latest research on the threat landscape and everything in between. I'm Susie Evershed, and today I'm joined by Morgan Demboski, Threat Intelligence Analyst at Sophos. Thank you, Morgan, for joining us. And I didn't even check. Have I just said your name correctly?
Yep, you nailed it, Morgan Demboski.
I feel like I should have checked that first.
No, all good. Thank you so much for having me, Susie. Excited to be here.
Fab. And we are talking today about the latest piece of research that we've just published on our blog that you've authored. So this is all about Goldblade. So we're going to start right at the top. Could you tell us a little bit about Goldblade, the group?
Yes, I guess that is a really good place to start. So, Goldblade is a pretty prolific threat group that you'll see referred to in reporting by other names such as Red Curl, Red Wolf, Earth Capre. There's many different names, but this group in particular has been active since around at least 2018, and over those, 7 years or so, their primary objective has been commercial cyber espionage. So, in other words, that basically means that they focus on stealing sensitive information like business
Mhm.
data, credentials, emails from companies specifically for the purpose of a competitive or a financial type of gain. And in March of this year, they began to also kind of selectively deploy a custom ransomware that they developed called QW Crypt in attacks, which I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about later.
Yeah.
But more just about Goldblade themselves, they've been known to target in the past a wide range of sectors and countries. However, in this specific campaign that we discuss in the blog that we published recently, the campaign spanned from February of 2024 to August of 2025. And during that time, we really saw them narrow in on Canadian organizations specifically. And actually, over 80% of the Goldblade intrusions that we observed during that time period targeted organizations based in Canada across multiple different sectors, but we are really seeing them narrow in on Canada for some reason.
That's quite
And
unusual, isn't it, to see such a specific campaign global, like regionally.
yeah, especially for, an actor that has targeted Russia in the past and many, other different types of countries, to see them really kind of focus on Canada was a shift in their overall tactics and their victimology, if you will.
Mm. Mm. And were there other sort of evolutions in their tactics that you saw in that campaign?
Yeah, so there were, I think, some overall themes in Goldblade's like attack chain that remained the same, but during the campaign, as you mentioned, there were kind of a number of evolutions. So one hallmark of their activity is their custom malware, which is known as Red Loader, which is a pretty simple backdoor that allows the threat actors to be able to download and execute scripts in kind of a three-stage infection chain. And so while their use of Red Loader, they continue to use Red Loaders in most of, if not all of their attacks, but the way that they deliver it has seen multiple different iterations of different delivery tactics. And another kind of example of an evolution that they've taken was with their initial access vector. So they've always been kind of known to target HR employees and to
Mhm.
impersonate like job applicants, but they've switched their approach from spear phishing to abusing recruitment platforms. So they've kind of made these small shifts to make their tactics more evasive. And, in specific to the initial access vector, I think when they shifted in September 2024 from these phishing emails to abusing these third-party recruitment platforms like Indeed, Jazz HR, even LinkedIn to deliver their Red Loader malware, this is a really kind of sneaky move because people are pretty trained to keep an eye out for phishing emails. Like we know
Yeah.
phishing emails are probably going to come through. You are kind of trained to keep an eye out for them. But these recruitment platforms, they're inherently trusted and they're designed to enable HR staff to review all of the incoming resumes. So doing it this way and changing to abusing these platforms and delivering their resumes through these platforms makes it not only much more likely for that employee to open their malicious documents, but
Mhm.
also kind of evades those email-based protections, which can be kind of tricky, and not a lot of people would realize that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. When you're kind of looking out for something, it does make those fishes so much more effective. So you can see why they do it. So that's a really great look at, an overview of Gold Blade and the specific campaign. What makes this, like you say again in the blog, that this group's quite different to other threat actors that we've seen. Can you call out a few of the specifics of what makes them different to the other groups that maybe you're tracking?
Yeah, so this group is a little bit of an enigma in the threat landscape, I like to say. So they perform cyber espionage, which, you'd usually see them in the realm of APTs or
Mm,
state-sponsored actors. But Goldblade, they're not state-sponsored. They don't even have any evidence of a political motivation. And
okay.
at the same time, there's not even a lot of information about where they're based. Some researchers have assessed them to be Russian speaking, but they've also been seen targeting Russian organizations, which is typically off limits for cyber criminals that are operating, from Russia.
Mhm.
So, there's a lot of questions about where they even might be based. But while that is odd, at the same time, while they're financially motivated, they don't at look like a lot of the other cyber criminal groups that you would commonly think of. They don't operate a data leak site. They don't really publicly extort victims.
Interesting.
They have these very targeted operations, and they have their eyes on the long game in the sense that we've seen them try to compromise the same organizations multiple times using new tactics and tooling. And all of these factors kind of point to them being what is known for like a hack for hire group, which
Okay.
basically means that, one or multiple clients pay them to compromise specific organizations for a range of purposes, to steal data, to gain access to emails, to deploy ransomware. And, in the sense of Goldblade, they seem to be really focused on business operations. So I would guess that their clients are likely looking for some sort of competitive edge and paying them to get that competitive advantage.
Yeah.
But I think one additional thing that makes them a little bit of an interesting group is their tempo of attacks. So they have this interesting kind of pattern of where each new iteration of their delivery chain and, change in their tactics is preceded by like a month or two of just complete silence. So, for example, in March of this year, we saw a big spike of Goldblade incidents, and we saw our first observed deployment of QW Crypt, their ransomware, in April. And then right after that, we didn't see any activity by the group for a period of, over 2 months before they launched a new wave of attacks in July using, new combinations of older techniques. And, take it with a grain of salt. This is based only on Sophos visibility,
Mhm.
but these periods of activity inactivity are likely, the attacker's time to develop new attack chains and to change tactics, especially in response to some external reporting on their methods.
So interesting. And when it comes to those new attack chains, what kinds of changes in the tactics are the Sophos analysts seeing like over this campaign period?
Yeah. So other than, the big shift in the initial access vector,
Hmm.
which definitely made them a lot sneakier, and I think made their lures and their attempts at initial access much more successful, unfortunately.
Mm.
There has been, as I mentioned, multiple iterations of delivery chains for their red loader malware where they use different payload formats, like using executables versus DLLs. They use different hosting mechanisms, like hosting their payloads on WebDAV servers to make it a little bit less detectable. They have changed their execution tactics, and they do this all in the attempt to try to improve the success of their malware delivery and to try to evade detection. And in that kind of string of evading detection, they've also introduced a range of new defense evasion tactics where they leverage a customized version of an EDR killer known as Terminator, and
Hmm.
they use a tactic known as bring your own vulnerable driver to be able to disable AV detections. And
Right.
they used multiple different combinations of and multiple different samples of this EDR killer to try to figure out what they could do to try to evade our detections, which was kind of interesting to see them trying so many different samples to try to get
Yeah.
around and disable our AV detections. But in addition to that, there was also their introduction of their ransomware QW crypt in March, which, definitely brought a new element to their attacks, you could say.
Oh, yeah, yeah, keeping it interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
they've got this constant changes to delivery methods and upgrades to their defense evasion. So, it shows how the group's trying to routinely update their tactics and stay effective. Why do you think then that the group introduced ransomware at this point to their operations? Is there anything about, QW Crypt that's notable and the way that Goldblade is dropping it in their attacks?
Yeah, so it's kind of unclear why Goldblade developed like a locker or ransomware capability. It was first reported on by Bitdefender in March of this year, and we first saw it deployed in an incident response in April. And, for example, in that April attack, the threat actors, we saw them manually collecting a bunch of sensitive information, and then they went dormant for, a multi-day period before they deployed the ransomware. And overall, they also appear to be very selective in their deployments. So it's unclear why they kind of introduced ransomware into their attack chain. It's, unknown if they're deploying it at a client's direction, like if a client is telling them we want this client to be infected with ransomware, or if they turn to ransomware after maybe already trying to, steal and sell the data, or after failing to secure a buyer. So it might be
Yeah.
like some sort of backup plan, in case their initial method of stealing data doesn't get them the kind of payout that they want.
Yeah.
When it comes to, the QW Crypt locker itself, it isn't overly sophisticated, I would say. One thing that's interesting is that the ransomware launcher and the deployment scripts that come along with it are tailored specifically to the victim that they're targeting. So they have, victim specific IDs. So, they make it tailored to the target environment. And, it appears in some cases they only try to target like the virtualization software, like hypervisors, but in other cases, depending on who the target is, they'll try to attempt to encrypt both endpoints and hypervisors, which is
Right.
kind of interesting that they pick and choose what kind of damage to do to these organizations. And their ransom note actually, interestingly, steals a lot of language from Lockbit ransom notes, which doesn't mean that those groups are necessarily connected in any way, but more likely probably indicates that Goldblade is trying to reuse that kind of already tried and true phrasing from
Mm.
a established ransomware group and like say, oh, well, that obviously works. We'll take that same language and adopt it the same way. But, overall, I think the observations of QW Crypt, in specifically Sophos customer environments are pretty sparse. The deployment of the ransomware appears to be very selective. And so while they may still be deploying the ransomware actively in attacks, we haven't really observed it in Sophos customer environments since July. So, who knows? It could probably be another recuperation period,
Mm.
improvement development period for the actors, or we just, possibly just couldn't be seeing them within, our realm of visibility at the moment.
Thank you so much for sharing that research. Now, while we know it's crucial to understand the threat, so we know how best to enable companies to navigate it. So, what are the recommendations from Sophos XOps to help organizations to protect against the TTPs of Goldblade?
Yeah, so I think there are several practical steps. And, while it's more all-encompassing, if you will, I think one big recommendation is just to make sure that all endpoints are centrally managed and, have those EDR protections and that you have very comprehensive logging because it's just so crucial. But, while at the same time, these tools are very critical and having active protections are critical. They're not always enough, unfortunately. So having analysts at the same time that are monitoring and responding to these detections is really key in making sure that, an organization is fully covered. I mean, all of the Goldblade intrusions that were targeting Sophos MDR managed detection and response customers were detected and escalated prior to that impact stage. So it just goes to show how critical it is to have analysts that are on the ball and watching these detections and making sure that your team knows about it.
Mhm.
But I think more specifically, the abuse of recruitment workflows and, targeting HR for initial access is becoming more and more common. And so it's important to really try to harden these recruitment workflows. So in addition to educating employees on how to spot potentially malicious resumes and advising them to never try to bypass errors by downloading resumes from external links, that's kind of key. Never go to an external link to download those resumes. But, also, from a recruitment workflow hardening standpoint, consider routing those resumes from recruitment platforms through email and security gateways, or possibly even using secure document viewers that open resumes in like a sandbox browser or like a PDF only viewer will kind of help, isolate that document in case it does contain some sort of malicious content.
Brilliant. I mean, the kind of link with the HR teams definitely makes me think straight away to North Korean IT workers that we track as Nickel Tapestry. And it really highlights that role of the cross-department understanding and like the whole organization engagement in cybersecurity.
Oh, yeah, most definitely. I mean, there's, as you said, many different types of actors that are abusing the job applicant in like the recruitment process in different
Mm,
ways. So it's really important that HR staff and recruiters are regularly updated on tactics in these campaigns like
mm,
this and others like Nickel Tapestry, and that these, HR employees are treated like the first line of defense that they are. If they can spot and flag up these phishing attempts and these malicious documents, that stops it right before they even get access to
mm.
the environment. So it's so critical to make sure that everybody across your organization has a good understanding of what's happening within the cyber threat landscape and in cybersecurity.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for joining us, Morgan, and for sharing this brilliant research. Thanks to everyone who joined us to hear our cyber short. For more information, please do follow our socials and definitely stay tuned for future episodes. Thank you again.
Thank you. Have a great one.